On April 15, 2002, sisters Emma and Lily Hartwell were preparing for a week-long hike in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state, unaware that 6 months later they would be found dead in the basement of an abandoned toy store, dressed like porcelain dolls with wire instead of fingers. A sunny spring morning filled the kitchen of the Hartwell home in Maplewood with soft light. 23-year-old Emma methodically stacked camping supplies into her backpack, marking each item on her list with a ballpoint pen. Her younger sister, 21-year-old Lily, an art college student, spread new route maps on the table and placed brightly colored markers at key points on their planned trip. "Don't forget your phone charger," their mother, Diane Hartwell, reminded them as she laid out homemade sandwiches for the first day of the trip. "And call every night when you find a signal." The girls' father, Robert Hartwell, a 59-year-old civil engineer, helped load the gear into their blue Subaru Outback, a shabby but reliable family car that had served them well for 8 years. He would later recall the mundane details of that morning with painful clarity. How Lily insisted on taking the Polaroid camera despite its weight, and how Emma double-checked the fastenings on the tent. "They were in great spirits," Robert testified 6 days later to police officers. They had been planning this camping trip for a year. Security cameras at the Pine Creek gas station in suburban Maplewood captured the sisters at 2 hours and 43 minutes into the afternoon. The footage shows Emma, wearing a red windbreaker, paying for fuel, while Lily, with a distinctive braid over her shoulder, selects energy bars and extra bottles of water. Both are smiling as they talk to the cashier. This is the last videotape of the Hartwell sisters. At 3 hours and 20 minutes, their vehicle was seen driving through a checkpoint at Cascade Mountain National Park. Ranger Michael Dawson registered their arrival and handed them a map of popular hiking trails. "Typical hikers, well prepared," he noted in his testimony. "Nothing that made them stand out from the dozens of other hikers that day." According to their route plan filed at the park entrance, the sisters were going to hike the Blackwater Ridge Trail, a moderately difficult route of 32 kilometers. Their first overnight stay was planned for Eagle Creek Meadow, 7 kilometers from the start of the trail. The entire route was planned for 5 days with a return to the starting point by the evening of April 20th. At 7 hours and 22 minutes on the evening of April 15th, a final message was sent from Emma's phone to her parents. "Got to the first parking lot, beautiful sunset, talking tomorrow." Accompanying the message was a photograph of their tent, pitched on a small rise among the conifers, overlooking a mountain range colored purple by the setting sun. This was the final proof that the sisters were all right. When they didn't hear from them the next day, Robert and Diane weren't worried. "In the mountains, you often lose signal," Diane explained to a neighbor. "The girls warned me that the connection might be unstable." After 2 days of silence, the mild concern turned to wariness. Diane tried calling her daughters every 2 hours, but all calls went directly to voicemail. Robert contacted his sister's friends, hoping one of them might have heard from them, but no one had heard from them since their departure. On April 18th, after 3 days of complete lack of communication, Diane called the Maplewood County Sheriff's Department. "My daughters are missing," she uttered the words that changed their family's life forever. Police Sergeant Carl Jenkins tried to reassure the worried mother. "Communication is often lost in the mountains," he repeated what they had already told themselves. "We can't report adults missing after 3 days of a planned 5-day hike." Nevertheless, given the family's impeccable reputation and his parents' persistence, Jenkins agreed to contact the National Park Ranger Service. Uniformed rangers checked the parking lot near the beginning of the trail where the sisters' car was supposed to be parked. The blue Subaru was in its spot, confirming that the girls were still in the park. On April 19th, when the sisters failed to show up or make contact on the penultimate scheduled day of the hike, park officials finally initiated a search operation. 2 rangers set out on the Blackwater Ridge Trail, expecting to meet Emma and Lily on the way back. They reached their first sleeping point, Eagle Creek Glade, but found no sign of the sisters or any trace of their camp. At dawn on April 20th, the day the sisters were due to return, a full-scale search and rescue operation was officially launched. 15 rangers, 23 volunteers from the local search and rescue team, and 4 canine units combed the main route and adjacent trails. 2 helicopters circled over the area, inspecting hard-to-reach areas. On the 3rd day of the search, the volunteer team found a small waterfall off the main route, with fallen trees forming a natural bridge over the stream. In the wet soil, they noticed the tracks of 2 pairs of hiking boots leading across this makeshift crossing toward an area unmarked on hiking maps. The search parties followed this direction, and on the 6th day of the operation, April 25th, Ranger Thomas Brennan made the first significant discovery. In a small valley hidden behind a rock ledge about 5 kilometers off the main route, he discovered the sisters' camp. Emma and Lily's tent was still standing, impeccably anchored on a perfectly level spot among the pine trees. The sleeping bags inside were neatly spread out, as if awaiting the return of their owners. All personal belongings were in their proper places, backpacks leaning against a tree, cooking utensils stacked by a small fire pit, a book open in the middle lying next to a camping lantern. It looked like they had just gone for a walk and were going to come back, Brennan later described in his report. No signs of struggle or panic, no signs of animals or weather damage. The only unexplained detail was a small wooden doll placed in the very center of the camp. Hand-carved from light-colored wood, the palm-sized figure depicted a girl in a long dress with elaborate facial features and hair dyed black. The doll was posed as if watching the entire camp, its glass eyes reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. None of the sisters' acquaintances identified this doll as their property. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now. Your likes and comments make a huge difference. YouTube's algorithms prioritize videos with active interaction, which helps the story of the Hartwell sisters reach a wider audience. Thank you for your support. Now back to this disturbing investigation. On April 26th, 2002, on a gray, rainy day, Detective Michael Reeves first visited the abandoned Hartwell sisters camp. A lean man of 47 with prematurely graying temples, Reeves had a reputation as one of the Maplewood County Sheriff's Department's top investigators. He'd investigated hundreds of cases in his 15 years of service, but the sisters' disappearance hit something personal. He himself had 2 daughters about the same age. "Something doesn't add up here," Reeves muttered as he skirted the pristine encampment protected by police tape. He put on latex gloves and carefully picked up the wooden doll, turning it around under the light of a portable flashlight. "This is what someone wanted us to find." The doll was the first item packed for shipment to the state crime lab. It was followed by soil samples, fibers from the tent, and shoe prints taken from the camp's perimeter. Forensics found that the soil around the tent contained the footprints of at least 3 different people. 2 sets of footprints matched the size and tread pattern of the sisters' hiking boots. The 3rd set belonged to a larger shoe, about size 43, with characteristic wear on the right sole. The footprints indicate quiet departure, not flight, explained forensic scientist Janet Collins, showing the photographs. The depth of the prints and their location indicate that all three walked at a measured pace in a northeasterly direction away from the camp, toward an unmaintained trail. The search teams found this unmarked trail, which went through dense undergrowth to an abandoned logging road. It took the experienced rangers about 3 hours to follow the trail, which is how long Emma's cell phone signal remained active after their last message. According to the mobile operator's reports, the last phone activity had been recorded at 11 hours and 26 minutes on the evening of April 15th, exactly 3 hours and 4 minutes after the message had been sent to her parents. The geolocation data pointed to a point 17 kilometers from the camp, near an abandoned forest road used mostly by the forestry services. Why would two experienced hikers leave a safe camp at night, and even accompanied by an unknown man? That question became central to Reeves's investigation. With no signs of struggle or coercion, we have to assume they left voluntarily. But what could have convinced them? The answer began to take shape after interviewing other hikers who had visited the area in the same days. 3 independent groups reported meeting a man offering wooden souvenirs of his own making, small animal figurines, key chains, and, crucially, miniature dolls. He was pretty friendly, but a little weird, recalled 28-year-old camper Allison Green. Tall, thin, with a long graying beard. Said he lived nearby and knew secret spots that had amazing views that were inaccessible to regular tourists. Another hiker, Mark Fisher, added an important detail. He mentioned some protected waterfall hidden from the tourist trails. Said he used to work as a local guide. We declined, but he didn't insist. On the basis of descriptions was made a sketch. A man of 55 years, about 185 centimeters tall, thin build, with a long gray beard and bald spots. Special features: a scar across the right eyebrow and a slouch, possibly the result of an old back injury. A sketch was distributed to all police stations in the state and published in the local media. The Hartwell family put out a $20,000 reward for information that would help find the missing sisters. The search continued for 3 weeks, covering an area of over 50 square miles. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras scanned hard-to-reach areas. Specially trained dogs combed forested areas. Divers explored nearby lakes and rivers. Not a single lead yielded significant results. By the end of May 2002, the scale of the search operation was significantly reduced. News channels switched to other events. Volunteers returned to their daily lives. Only the family and a small group of dedicated friends continued to distribute flyers and organize local searches on weekends. Detective Reeves, however, did not abandon the investigation. The atypical absence of any trace of missing hikers, no personal belongings, clothing, or even remains, pointed to deliberate human intervention rather than an accident or wild animal attack. The key to the mystery remained the wooden doll found in the camp. Forensic examination determined that the figurine had been carved from a special grade of maple, using professional wood-carving tools. The paint used for the finish contained rare pigments used primarily by professional artists and doll restorers. In July, Reeves brought Eleanor Smith, an art historian with the University of Washington's Department of Applied Arts, who specializes in traditional dolls and toys, to the case. This work is by a master craftsman of very high caliber, Smith concluded after careful examination. Notice the detailing of the facial features, the proportions of the limbs. This is characteristic of the old European school of doll making, especially the tradition that came from Eastern Germany. She pointed to a barely visible engraving on the sole of the doll, a stylized letter B, artfully woven into the ornamentation. It may be the signature of the craftsman. I'm familiar with the manner, but I need to check in specialized catalogs. A week later, Eleanor Smith provided Reeves with important information. The characteristic carving style and markings matched the wares of the Eternal Dolls store, which had operated in the neighboring town of Pinecrest from 1993 to 1999. The store was owned by a craftsman named Victor Blackwood, Smith reported, showing an old newspaper clipping with a picture of a gray-bearded man standing surrounded by exquisite dolls. He was known for his unique artwork. Collectors from all over the coast came for his dolls. Reeves immediately requested all available information about Blackwood. According to official records, the master closed his store after a serious fire in his workshop in 1999. Medical records showed that he suffered extensive burns to his hands and face. After being discharged from the hospital, Blackwood sold the store building and purchased a secluded cabin in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, about 40 kilometers from where the sisters disappeared. Check all missing persons from the last 10 years within a 100-mile radius, Reeves ordered, turning to young Officer Jenkins. Look for women 20 to 25 years old, especially those who disappeared while camping or traveling alone. The results of the search, received 3 days later, made Reeves go cold. In the last decade, 3 young women had disappeared without a trace in the region under similar circumstances. Jennifer Mills, 24 years old, disappeared during a solo hike in June 1998. Alyssa Cooper, 22 years old, disappeared in September of 2298 during a photographic expedition. Caitlin Winters, 23 years old, disappeared in May of 2001, having gone to explore abandoned mining camps. All 3 women were physically active, experienced hikers, had blonde hair and correct facial features. All 3 disappeared without a trace. Their camps or vehicles were found untouched, with no signs of struggle or hasty flight. Not a single body has ever been found, despite extensive search operations. And most disturbingly, all 3 incidents had occurred within a 50-kilometer radius of Victor Blackwood's cabin. Reeves looked at the photos of the missing women spread out in front of him. Now, he was sure, they weren't facing an ordinary disappearance in the wilderness. Somewhere out there, perhaps very close by, a serial kidnapper was operating, preying on young women in the mountains. But where does he keep his victims? And what happened to the Hartwell sisters? October 23rd of the year. 2002 was cold and overcast in the town of Pinecrest, Washington. A light rain drummed on the sidewalks of the deserted Main Street, where a 2-story red brick Victorian mansion stood among boarded-up storefronts. A faded sign that read, "Forever Dolls," barely hung above the entrance, swaying on rusty hinges with every gust of wind. 16-year-old Sam Wilson, a skinny teenager in a black sweatshirt drenched in rain, glanced nervously over his shoulder before inserting a lockpick into the keyhole of the building's back door. The neon clock on his wrist showed 9 hours and 14 minutes past midnight. "Just to the basement and back," he whispered under his breath, repeating the terms of the bet. "Take a photo for proof and we can get out of here." The door yielded with a long creak. The air was thick with the smell of mold, dust, and something chemical like formaldehyde. Wilson switched on the flashlight on his phone, and the beam caught the darkness of an abandoned workshop. Workbenches with tools, shelves of tarnished paint cans, stale brushes, and dust-covered blanks of doll heads and limbs. Through the maze of first-floor rooms, the teenager made his way to the stairs leading to the basement. According to local legend, the store's owner, the old puppeteer Victor Blackwood, had practiced some dark rituals there before disappearing after a fire in the workshop. Teenagers have been scaring each other for decades with stories of cursed dolls supposedly stored in the basement. "Go down to Blackwood's basement on Halloween," Sam was teased by his classmates. "If you dare." The wooden steps creaked under his weight. The flashlight's beam cut through the thick darkness, revealing the outline of antique furniture covered with dusty sheets. The basement was unexpectedly spacious, with low vaulted ceilings and brick walls. In the far corner, the teenager noticed a strange composition, a miniature tea table with an antique porcelain service, surrounded by two antique armchairs with high backs. In the chairs sat two figures in Victorian dresses. "Dolls," Sam exhaled with relief, pointing the flashlight at the composition. The two human-sized figures were dressed in lavish 19th-century gowns, one pale blue, the other cream, with lace collars and cuffs. Their faces concealed elaborately painted porcelain masks with graceful features and delicate blushes. Glass eyes glittered unnaturally in the lamplight. White satin gloves covered their hands, elegantly raised as if the figures were frozen in the process of tea drinking. Sam stepped closer, mesmerized by the craftsmanship. He reached out to take a picture when his elbow accidentally caught one of the figures. With a sudden movement, the porcelain mask slipped from the face of the figure seated on the right, falling to the floor with a thud. A scream caught in the teenager's throat. Beneath the mask was what had once been a human face. Withered, mummified skin stretched tightly over a skull, with sunken eye sockets in which glass eyeballs were glued. Blonde hair, neatly styled and varnished, contrasted with the death-altered flesh. Sam Wilson recoiled in panic, knocking over a chair and breaking a cup. He flew out of the basement, stumbling down the steps, and didn't stop until he reached the nearest payphone at a gas station 3 blocks from the abandoned store. At 9:36 in the evening, the dispatcher for the 911 service took a panting, almost hysterical call. There's bodies in an old doll store. They look like dolls, but they're people. Oh my God, they're real people." The first patrol car arrived at the Forever Doll shop 12 minutes later. Officers Daniel Morris and Sarah Chen found a shivering, pale Sam Wilson waiting for them under the visor of a boarded-up storefront in a neighboring building. The teenager was placed in a police car with the heater on, having first taken a statement. Then, armed with flashlights and with their hands on their holsters, the officers entered the abandoned building through a back door still ajar after Wilson's hasty escape. At 10 hours and 2 minutes, Officer Morris requested backup over the radio. "Dispatch, we have confirmation. 2 bodies, female, and this, something I've never seen before." By midnight, the area around the old doll store had turned into a full-scale forensic scene. Police tape fenced the perimeter. High-powered spotlights illuminated the building. 2 ambulances and 4 patrol cars blocked the street. Forensic officers in white hazmat suits were in and out of the building, carefully carrying packed evidence. Detective Michael Reeves was one of the first to arrive. He slowly made his way down to the basement where medical examiner Dr. Elizabeth Norris was already examining the remains. "This is them," Reeves said quietly, recognizing the turquoise bracelet on the wrist of one of the victims, the same one Emma Hartwell had received from her sister on her 23rd birthday, according to her parents' testimony. We found the Hartwell sisters. The scene before the investigators was beyond their professional experience. The two women were seated across from each other at an elegantly set tea table with china cups and a silver teapot. They were dressed in authentic Victorian dresses, with carefully styled hair and makeup applied to mummified skin. The mask that had fallen from Emma's face lay on the floor, but a second mask still hid Lily's face. Judging by the condition of the bodies, they've been dead for about 6 months, which is consistent with the time of the disappearance, Dr. Norris reported, examining the remains without touching them. But there were preserving agents used here, some kind of embalming process. The most disturbing discovery was what was revealed upon closer examination of the victim's hands. White satin gloves concealed the absence of fingers. Instead, inside the gloves were thin metal wire frames curved to elegantly hold teacups. The basement of the store had been transformed into a workshop and studio at the same time. On one wall hung dozens of photographs documenting the sisters' transformation, from the first shots of them looking frightened, bound, but alive, to the final stages of their transformation into dolls. Shelves contained chemicals, tools for taxidermy, wood carving, and porcelain work. On the workbench lay a leather-bound diary in which observations and procedures were recorded in uber-calligraphic handwriting. Day 3. Subjects are adapting well. The older one is more resistant to sedatives. The dosage should be increased by 20%. Day 5. Began skin preparation. A mixture of formaldehyde and traditional embalming solution gives a perfect porcelain-like texture while maintaining elasticity. The last entry, dated April 22nd, read, "My masterpieces are complete, but I hear them whispering in the night. I must go further into the wilderness to find quieter dolls." Among the evidence was a box of wood-carving tools, the same tools used to make the wooden doll found at the sisters' camp 6 months earlier. Now the picture is clear. Victor Blackwood used wooden dolls as his calling card, leaving them at the site of disappearances. By dawn, forensics had collected over 200 pieces of evidence from the basement of the Eternal Dolls. The bodies of the Hartwell sisters were carefully transported to the county morgue for a thorough forensic examination. Preliminary findings indicated that the sisters had died from an overdose of sedatives about a week after the abduction. In a metal cabinet hidden behind a false basement wall, investigators found a neatly organized archive. Folders of newspaper clippings about the missing women, maps of hiking trails with marked locations where wooden decoy dolls had been left behind, and, which sent a chill down the spine of even the most experienced detectives, 3 more sets of porcelain masks prepared for future dolls. Reeves slowly went through these masks, each one signed with a name: Jennifer, Alyssa, Caitlin, the names of the very missing women whose cases he'd linked together just a few weeks ago. Now they knew who had kidnapped and killed the Hartwell sisters. They understood how he had chosen his victims and lured them. But the most important question remained unanswered. Where was Victor Blackwood now? And who would be his next puppet? In the early twilight of October 24th, 2002, a task force of 12 state police officers surrounded a small cabin lost in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The cabin of time-darkened pine logs hid in the dense shade of centuries-old spruce trees, 40 kilometers from the nearest settlement. The dwelling of Victor Blackwood, the 63-year-old former owner of the Eternal Dolls store, the prime suspect in the disappearance and murder of the Hartwell sisters. "Exit slowly with your hands up," came over the loudspeaker. No one responded. After 3 warnings, the tactical team entered the cabin. Blackwood was not found, but evidence of his involvement in the crimes was everywhere. According to property records, Victor Blackwood had purchased this secluded lot in 1999, shortly after a fire destroyed his workshop in Pinecrest. The fire, Detective Reeves has now determined, surprisingly coincided with the disappearance of 24-year-old Melissa Jenkins, an art college student who had come to Pinecrest to study the traditional crafts of the region. "We checked insurance claims," Reeves explained at the briefing. "The fire occurred on September 12th, 1999, exactly 1 week after Melissa Jenkins visited the Blackwood store. She was seen entering Eternal Dolls, but no one saw her leave." In Blackwood's cabin, investigators discovered a secret room hidden behind a false panel in the back of a wood closet. The small space, illuminated by a single lamp, was set up as a shrine. On the center wall was a board with pinned photographs of 5 young women, including the Hartwell sisters, Jennifer Mills, Alyssa Cooper, and Caitlin Winters. Under each photo is a small dried flower and the date. The shelves surrounding this eerie semblance of an altar were filled with wood-carving tools, sewing kits, porcelain blanks for doll heads, and miniature garments sewn with incredible care. In a locked suitcase under the bed, officers found Victorian-era dresses identical to those in which the Hartwell sisters' bodies had been dressed. Blackwood didn't improvise, noted forensic scientist Sarah Wong, documenting the findings. He planned every detail, creating his masterpieces with manic precision. In a desk drawer, investigators found a collection of tourist maps with locations marked in red felt-tip pen. Each of these dots corresponded to where one of the victims disappeared. Pencil notes in the margins indicated a careful study of ranger schedules, patrol routes, and areas with the least cell phone coverage. Blackwood's neighbors, the few residents of remote shacks, described him as a reserved but polite man. Margaret Simmons, a 72-year-old retiree whose cabin was 3 kilometers from Blackwood's home, recalled, "He often brought me wooden bird figures. He said he carved them to calm his nerves after the fire. He had terrible scars on his arms, the result of that accident." Before moving to the mountains, Victor Blackwood was a respected doll maker whose work was prized by collectors across the country. Old articles in the local newspaper, the Pinecrest Chronicle, described him as the last keeper of the traditions of the German school of doll making. An interview with him, dated 1997, contained the prophetic quote, "Dolls are eternal. They don't age, they don't betray, they don't pass away. That is their perfection." Forensic analysis determined that the wooden doll found at the Hartwell sisters' camp and the dolls stored in the cabin were created with the same tools. The wood is a special type of maple that grows only in certain areas of the Cascade Mountains. What's more, soil samples from shoes found in Blackwood's cabin match the composition of soil from the site of the sisters' disappearance. "We have enough evidence to bring charges," said District Attorney Richard Parker. "But first, we need to find Blackwood himself." Victor Blackwood's last confirmed appearance was captured by surveillance cameras at the Portland bus station on October 26th, 3 days after the bodies were discovered. The footage shows him buying a bus ticket to Seattle. The gray-bearded man wearing a black hat and dark glasses differed from known photographs of Blackwood, but the characteristic slouch and movements of his right arm, which was damaged in the fire, gave away his identity. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the search, putting Blackwood on a national wanted list. His picture was posted at every police station, bus station, and homeless shelter throughout the Pacific Northwest. Despite the massive operation, the suspect's trail broke in Seattle. The turning point came 6 weeks later, when a group of hikers exploring a little visited part of the Olympic National Forest came across an unusual structure high among the branches of an ancient cedar tree. The intricately arranged treehouse, cleverly disguised as a natural growth, was about 8 feet above the ground. "We only spotted it because one of the group decided to photograph a rare bird in the upper branches," said team leader Jason Pack. "Otherwise, we would have walked by without even realizing it existed." Inside the cabin, police found a basic set of wood-carving tools, a supply of canned food, and, most disturbingly, a half-filled diary in a familiar leather binding. The last entries contained a detailed description of a young woman with perfect proportions and porcelain skin, who jogged regularly on a trail along the coast. Blackwood noted the time of her appearance, her preferred route, and, with frightening thoroughness, her lack of chaperones. "Preparing for another kidnapping," Reeves concluded, studying the diary. But something spooked him. Perhaps the news of the discovery of the Hartwell sisters' bodies. The last entry in the diary, dated October 23rd, the day the bodies were discovered, contained just one sentence. "They found my girls. I need to go deeper, to a place where no one will find me or my new dolls." On one page of the diary, investigators found a carefully drawn map of the coastal portion of the Olympic Peninsula, with a marked dot at its most remote part, a place known to local rangers as the Lost Coast because of its inaccessible cliffs and unpredictable tides. "He's there," Reeves said confidently, pointing to the map, "and I'm afraid he's not alone." A fine November rain drummed on the black umbrellas of those gathered in Maplewood's Eternal Rest Cemetery. On November 12, 2002, sisters Emma and Lily Hartwell had found their final resting place under the shade of an old maple tree. The ceremony, intended to be private, drew hundreds of people: neighbors, friends, search volunteers, and even strangers shocked by the brutality of the crime. 2 white caskets, closed at the family's insistence, were drowned in bouquets of white lilies, the younger sister's favorite flowers. "We are gathered here not only to mourn a tragic loss, but to celebrate the lives of 2 incredible young women," Pastor James Wilson pronounced as Robert and Diane Hartwell, supporting each other, stood by their daughters' graves. In the months following the sisters' discovery, the investigation team, led by Michael Reeves, focused on finding other victims. Coordinates found in Blackwood's journals led to 3 unmarked burials in remote areas of the Cascade Mountains. Exhumation confirmed the worst fears. The remains belonged to Jennifer Mills, Alyssa Cooper, and Caitlin Winters, who disappeared between 1998 and 2001. All of the victims were subjected to a similar transformation process, Dr. Elizabeth Norris, the county's chief medical examiner, noted in her report. The bodies were embalmed, fitted with porcelain masks, and placed in various stage compositions reflecting the Victorian era. Under pressure from the media and the public, the FBI expanded the investigation to a national scope. Agents checked similar unsolved cases throughout the Pacific Northwest. By March of 2003, Blackwood's DNA had been linked to disappearances in Oregon, Montana, and Northern California. The pattern, traced over nearly 15 years, pointed to a well-crafted series of crimes that matched the suspect's movements. Blackwood was not an impulsive criminal, FBI Special Agent Thomas Fowler explained at the press conference. He chose his victims in advance, studied their habits, and acted only when he was sure of success. Enough time passed between the disappearances to keep the pattern from drawing attention. The Hartwell sisters' case led to significant changes in safety protocols on hiking trails throughout the Pacific Northwest. The National Park Service has implemented mandatory registration of hikers with an exact route and expected time of return. Emergency GPS beacons became available for solo travelers and small groups, and the number of ranger patrols in remote areas doubled. These changes are a decade late, acknowledged Washington State Park Service Director Alan Morrison. But we will do everything we can to make sure something like this never happens again. Despite an extensive search, Victor Blackwood himself could not be located. A year after the crimes were discovered, on October 20th, 2003, a group of climbers came across a worn backpack stuck in a rock crevice on a remote cliff in the Olympic Mountains. Inside were personal items belonging to Blackwood, including a tattered diary with the last entry, "The voices of my dolls found me here. There is no way out but the one I create for myself." Search teams scrutinized the area around the cliff, including the coastal waters below, but no body was ever found. Experts were divided in their opinions. Some believed Blackwood had committed suicide by throwing himself off the cliff, while others suggested a staged attack to end the pursuit. "Without a body, we can't be sure," Jefferson County Police Chief Robert Carlisle acknowledged. "But the investigation is ongoing, and we will not rest until we determine its fate with absolute certainty." For the Hartwell family, the uncertainty of the fate of their daughter's killer has become an added burden. "There's no closure, no certainty that this is over," Diane Hartwell shared in a rare interview with a local newspaper. "Every time the news reports a missing hiker, my heart sinks." Despite the ongoing pain, in the spring of 2004, Robert and Diane Hartwell established the Hartwell Sisters Foundation, dedicated to hiker safety and support for families of the missing. The foundation has been used to create wilderness survival education programs, pay for additional ranger patrols, and provide support groups for relatives of victims of similar crimes. "Emma and Lily loved the outdoors, and we don't want our family's tragedy to scare people away from that beauty," Robert explained at the foundation's opening ceremony. "But we do want people to realize that even in the most scenic places, you have to remain vigilant." For Detective Michael Reeves, the Blackwood case was a career-defining case. Even after the investigation was officially closed, he continued to collect and analyze information on similar disappearances. In 2005, after 20 years of service, Reeves retired from the police force and founded a private consulting agency specializing in missing person searches. "I can't let this case go," Reeves admitted in an interview with a documentary filmmaker making a movie about the Hartwell case. "Until Blackwood is officially declared dead, there's a chance he's continuing his case somewhere else, under a different name, with new victims." In his office, Reeves keeps photos of all the confirmed victims, including the Hartwell sisters. Every year on the anniversary of their disappearance, he personally visits their graves, leaving a white lily each. And every year, he checks national missing persons databases, looking for a certain MO, young women who disappeared while hiking alone, their campsites found intact, and a small wooden doll among their personal belongings. Because deep down inside, Based on professional intuition and decades of experience, Detective Reeves is certain the doll maker's story isn't over. Somewhere out there, perhaps right now, Victor Blackwood is scouting out a new doll for his collection. And this time, he's going to be much more careful.